When a case seems unsolvable, the police will often release photos of clues, witnesses, or the perpetrator, in hopes that someone will come forward with helpful information. While this tactic has proven to be successful in the past, some photos fail to progress the case any further, and investigators have no choice but to continue searching for answers. Number 10. The last person in 34-year-old Susan Perkins' family to see her alive was her son, Russ Wigington, with whom she had a very close relationship. The rest of her family has echoed this sentiment, saying that Susan was always available to talk and was always willing to lend a helping hand. But on the 31st of August 2004, tragedy would strike, and Susan's loved ones are still searching for the person who ended her life 21 years after the fact. They're hopeful that a released photo from the crime scene will bring new leads in Susan's case, and that her attacker will finally be brought to justice. That day, Susan was contacted by one of her friends who had a favor to ask. Her friend owned a day spa close to Susan's house in Altamonte Springs, Florida, and asked her to help tint the building's windows. It was only a short distance from the family's house, so Susan was more than happy to help, and after saying goodbye to her two sons, she set out. Later that same day, Russ realized that his mother had been gone much longer than anticipated, and he tried to contact her on her cell phone, but got no answer, something that was very out of character for Susan. He decided to go to the spa to look for her, and he did so using his skateboard, but when he arrived, he realized that the spa was no longer there, since it had been moved to a new location without his knowledge. For the next few days, her family did all they could to locate her, including filing a missing person report, but no one could find any trace of Susan. Witnesses then came forward to report what they had seen that day, and fears for her safety became very real. It would come to light that Susan and her friend, the owner of the day spa, were kidnapped by a man who has never been identified. She explained that while she and Susan were busy working on the windows, the man entered the spa with a ski mask pulled over his head. He produced a large firearm and demanded that they hand over all the money they had on the premises, but not receiving as much as he had hoped, he decided to kidnap both women. He forced them into Susan's red Ford Focus and demanded that she drive to an ATM at 500 East Altamonte Street. There, they withdrew some money, which was then handed to the kidnapper, and he then told both of the women to get into the car's trunk. The kidnapper then started driving down Boston Avenue, but in the trunk, Susan and her friend had found the emergency release handle, and they jumped out. Susan hit her head on the pavement while doing so, and she was taken to a nearby hospital, but was later declared deceased as a result of her injuries. The man continued driving and eventually abandoned Susan's car about a block from the spa. A $10,000 reward is being offered to anyone who comes forward with information that leads to Susan's attacker being identified, and anyone who can aid the police in this investigation is asked to contact Crime Line at 1-800-423-8477. Number 9. A photo of the pajamas that a murder victim was wearing has caused quite a bit of confusion in the case of Linda Agostini, who lost her life to an attack in Albury, New South Wales, Australia in 1934. The case began on the 1st of September that year, when a man was walking his prize bull along Howlong Street and spotted something strange lying in Splitters Creek, which ran beneath the road. Upon closer inspection, he was shocked to discover that it was a body, and he contacted the police. When they arrived, they found the woman whose head had been wrapped in a towel after her body was placed in a Hessian sack. They also discovered that she'd been beaten, after which her life was ended with a firearm. Her attacker then tried to get rid of any possible evidence by setting her remains alight using kerosene, the smell of which still permeated the air. When she was found, the woman was dressed in yellow pajamas that contained a Chinese dragon print, which, thanks to the attacker's haste to flee the scene, had only been partially burned. Every effort was made to identify the victim, but when this failed, she was dubbed the Pajama Girl. Since the pajamas were made of silk, she was believed to be quite wealthy, since such materials were not affordable to the average person in Australia at the time. The case became muddled even further when contrasting descriptions of the pajamas were released. Some sources stated that they were white, others said they were black, while others reported that they were yellow. They did all agree, though, that they'd contained a dragon motif. It was determined that the Hessian sack came from Dalmore, where potatoes were farmed. It was suggested that the pajama girl was either Anna Filomena or Linda Agostini, both of whom had been reported as missing and bore a striking resemblance to the woman who was found. But investigators disagreed, and the case turned cold. 10 years later, it was finally revealed that Pajama Girl was indeed Linda, thanks to her medical records. When Linda's husband, Antonio, was questioned, investigators noted he was on edge. They asked why this was the case, and he immediately confessed he'd ended Linda's life. He stated he accidentally ended her life with a firearm, and after panicking, he decided to hide her body, and to destroy any evidence linking him to the crime, he set her remains on fire. Antonio was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 6 years in prison. This should have been the end of the case, but Philomena Morgan's mother remained adamant that it was her daughter who was found, and not Susan. Philomena's doctor would second her suspicions after examining the woman's dental records. He stated that he'd fitted 2 gold fillings in her teeth and that the fillings found in Pajama Girl's mouth were the very same ones. Dr. Thomas Benbow also believed that the police had made a mistake. He produced further evidence in the form of a crystal earring, a silk belt, a coat, a burned handbag, and a suitcase containing a photo of Philomena, which he discovered close to a shed near the crime scene. He also studied Pajama Girl and Susan's faces, which he found not to be a match. He tried to present his findings, but was ignored by the police, and these pieces of evidence were withheld during Antonio's trial. Thanks to modern investigative tools that have since been utilized, it's now believed that Susan has never been found, and that Antonio was erroneously convicted thanks to a plan by the police to list him as the culprit while knowing that he was innocent. It remains unknown whether any future plans are in place to finally solve this mystery, and only time will tell whether the truth will be revealed, and the reason behind Antonio's confession is still unexplained. Number 8. Shelby Jean Thornburg Crocker and her sister Christina grew up in Texas, but they had a very tough childhood. Their mother had a drinking problem and was found to be unfit to care for the 2 sisters. Hence, they were placed into foster care, where, as is so often the case, they were treated very badly. Nevertheless, they persevered and eventually made it out of the foster system. As an adult, Shelby struggled with her weight, but in the 2010s, she started working towards changing this. She managed to lose as much as 180 pounds and decided that she wanted to have some surgery done. She saved $1,000 and used this as a down payment for a tummy tuck. It would later come to light that she made the money while working as what she described as a companion to men who paid her. She assured Christina that she only accompanied them to dinners and there was no physical aspect to her job. But this would later be disproven when she was arrested for being a street worker in Dallas in 2014. But she would state that the police had arrested the wrong woman, and that they were actually looking to detain a different street worker that night. Christina, realizing just how dangerous Shelby's chosen profession was, asked her to find different work, but Shelby told her that if she quit, her boss, Marcus Johnson, would harm her or even end her life. It's known that she was supposed to meet up with an unknown man on the 4th of November, 2014, and that the man did indeed arrive at her apartment, which was located in the Conquistador Apartments building. A text message was found on Shelby's phone in which the man let her know that he had arrived. A still from the building's security system shows the man entering the building just after 8:30 that night. She then let Johnson, her boss, know that her customer had arrived by texting him the word "good," which they used as a code word that everything was fine. The man remained in Shelby's apartment for about 20 minutes and was caught on camera leaving at 8:57. Johnson then called Shelby but got no answer, and when he arrived at her apartment, he found her deceased. He dialed 911 and reported what he had found. Police officers arrived at the scene and, according to reports, proceeded to unwittingly contaminate several pieces of evidence that may have solved the case. But they were able to collect some of the attacker's hair from the scene, and so they had his DNA on record. This evidence was sent to be analyzed, but the DNA has never been matched to anyone in the CODIS database. It's known that Shelby's life was ended with a sharp blade, and that the man in the images is the only suspect in her case, but he's never been identified, and with no further evidence to follow, it remains to be seen if he will ever face the consequences of his actions. Number 7. In 2011, the FBI decided to release hundreds of photos of items collected during the investigation into David Parker Ray, a serial killer who's better known as the Toy Box Killer, who hailed from New Mexico. It's believed that these items may have belonged to Ray's victims, and so the authorities are asking that anyone who recognizes any of these pieces of jewelry and clothing to come forward. Ray has since passed away without revealing why they were in his possession. During his crime spree, which lasted from the mid-1950s to 1999, Ray was employed as a maintenance worker at the Elephant Butte State Park. But he was living in an unimaginable and horrific double life with the aid of his girlfriend Cynthia Hendy and his daughter Glenda Jean. His victims would be rendered incapacitated through the administering of an illegal substance, after which Ray would abduct them and transport them to a trailer that he'd outfitted specifically for his crimes. When they woke up, he would play a pre-recorded message in which he detailed his plans, the details of which are far too horrific to mention here. According to some reports, he had several other accomplices, but this has never been proven. Quite unbelievably, Ray didn't end all of his victims' lives. In some cases, he would force them to ingest a substance that would cause amnesia, and when they finally came to after being released, they had little to no memory of the horrific ordeal that they just lived through. By 1999, Ray had perfected his MO, and he must have thought that he'd never be caught. But in March of that year, he made an error that would finally bring his heinous crime spree to an end. He'd abducted a woman named Cynthia Vigil, and she was being held captive in his trailer, which would later be referred to as the Toy Box. She'd been there for 3 days by this point and was desperate to escape. Ray walked out of the trailer for a minute when she realized that he'd left his keys on the table, and she managed to grab them. Cynthia was able to free herself, and after making it out of the trailer, she ran to a mobile home where the owner called the police. Investigators raced to the trailer, and there they found everything that they needed to ensure that Ray would never again see the outside of a prison cell. The video camera that he used during the crimes was collected as evidence, along with his personal notes, the chains that he used as restraints, and several other items. Unbelievably, it could not be proven that Ray had ended any of his victims' lives, and he was only charged with kidnapping and another lesser crime. He was sentenced to 224 years in prison. Number 6. For the last 45 years, the police in Brevard County, Florida, have been trying to determine the identity of a woman who's known to have used an alias, but they've had no success so far. They've now asked for the public's assistance by releasing a photo of her, and hopefully someone will recognize her and bring the mystery to a close. On the 11th of October 1980, the police were called when a motorist driving along a rural road in Rockledge came across the disconcerting sight of a deceased woman lying by the side of Murrell Road. An autopsy determined that she was around 25 years old, and that she weighed about 120 pounds, and that she stood 5 foot 6 inches tall. Her hair had likely been dyed red at some point, but at the time of her passing, it was dyed brown. When she was found, she was dressed in a red shirt with a Pringles chip print, white shoes, and blue jeans. It's certain that she was attacked before her life was ended with a firearm, but the crime scene held no helpful evidence, and no suspects have ever been named. It was also determined that she was attacked at least 24 hours before she was found, but it remains unknown if any of her possessions were stolen. News of the woman's discovery soon made its way to the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, where someone recognized the Jane Doe as someone they had seen before. They checked the area's arrest records and discovered that she'd been arrested before under the name Joanne English. It seemed as though the case had made some good progress, but then came an unexpected setback. It would later come to light that when she was arrested, the woman provided the police with false information and that Joanne English was merely a pseudonym. The social security number she had used belonged to someone else who was not connected to her case, and so investigators were back at square one. Luckily, the authorities had a photo of the woman, thanks to her mugshot that was taken upon her arrest, and it was made available to the public in case someone recognized her and could provide details on her life, and anyone who might have had a motive for ending her life. Strangely, it's also unknown why she was arrested in Pinellas County. This information may have been very helpful to determine where she was from and who she was associated with before her life was ended, but the details remain a mystery. DNA was collected from the scene along with the woman's fingerprints, but neither has come back as a match to anyone in their respective databases. The DNA Doe Project has joined the investigation, and every effort is being made to determine her identity, but no leads have been received so far. But further steps are being taken to progress the case. Using her DNA, it's hoped that the woman's family tree can be found, and that her relatives will be able to identify her to the authorities. If this is done, the people with whom she associated with could also be identified, and this may lead investigators to her attacker and their motive. In the meantime, the public has been asked to contact the Brevard County Sheriff's Office at 321-633-8419. Number 5. The Jennings 8 is a collective term that's being used for 8 women who were found deceased in Jefferson Davis Parish, Louisiana, between 2005 and 2009. They were all victims of homicides, and their photos have been published in hopes that someone with information on their cases will come forward so that the culprits or culprit can be brought to justice. The first victim, 28-year-old Loretta Lewis, was found in a canal close to Jennings on the 20th of May, 2005. Her identity was determined, and it was discovered that she was a street worker who struggled with an illegal substance addiction, and hence it's believed that someone in the illegal substance trade is responsible for ending her life. Then, on the 18th of June that same year, the police found the remains of 30-year-old Ernestine Patterson. She was found in a canal near Jennings, and at one point, 2 suspects were named in question, but they were later released when it became apparent that they knew nothing of her demise. The third victim, 21-year-old Kristen Lopez, was found 2 years later. Once again, her body was discovered in a canal, and this time investigators were certain they had identified the culprits. Her boss, Frankie Richard, and his niece, Hannah Connor, were taken into custody, but they provided very little information, and with no further evidence being found to implicate them, they were set free. It had now become clear that someone was using the canals near Jennings as a dumping ground for their victims, but over the course of the next 18 months, the case would only become more bizarre. The bodies of 4 more women were found during this time span. They were identified as Whitney Dubois, LaSonia Brown, and Brittany Gary. It's believed they'd all lost their lives due to strangulation, and they'd all been in the canal for some time, due to the condition that their remains were found in. The authorities knew that something had to be done to curtail the dumping of bodies in these areas, and so a task force was established to try and flesh out the people responsible for these crimes. It was comprised of local, state, and federal investigators, and at first there was renewed hope that these cases would see some progress, but that simply was not the case. While the investigation was ongoing, an 8th body, that of 26-year-old Nicole Guillory, was discovered in Acadia Parish near Interstate 10. The 8 victims became known as the Jennings 8, or in some cases, the Jeff Davis 8. It was soon discovered that all 8 of these women knew each other. They'd all been informants to the police. They were struggling financially and were addicted to illegal substances. Several of the victims' families stated they'd been frightened of someone before they disappeared. It's been alleged that an officer, David Barry, and his wife may have been involved in ending these women's lives, but he was only questioned once before he passed away, and the true extent of his involvement remains unknown. The investigation is ongoing, but many people don't hold out much hope that it will ever be solved, since they're convinced that the true details of the case are being hidden in a police cover-up, though this has not been proven. Number 4. During the 1980s and 90s, it was considered relatively safe for most people to go out alone at night, since crime wasn't as rampant back then as it is in the world today. In modern times, it's considered too risky to travel alone after sunset, and unfortunately, 18-year-old Ebby Stepek lost her life while doing so in Little Rock, Arkansas. Ebby's case started on the 23rd of October, 2015. At the time, she was on the path to becoming a cosmetologist, and she was working 2 part-time jobs. She had a passion for makeup, and most of the money that she saved from her jobs was spent on new products. But in October of 2015, her mother Lori and stepfather Michael started to notice a change in Ebby's demeanor. She had started to rebel against Lori and Michael, storming out of the house after an argument on several occasions. She was told to either change her attitude or find somewhere else to live. She decided to leave her family's home, and for a while stayed with some of her friends and her brother Trevor. She discovered a newfound freedom, and on the 24th of October that year, decided to attend a party with a few friends who were unknown to Lori. But it was there that things went awry. At around 8 p.m. that night, Ebby texted Michael to report that she'd been assaulted by a group of men at the party, and that she needed him to contact the police. He and Lori were having dinner at a restaurant at the time, and Michael agreed to help, but took Lori home first without informing her of Ebby's message. In the meantime, Ebby was spending time at her grandparents' house, and told them that she was going out to meet with Michael at around 8 p.m. the next night. But she then went missing, and none of her family members were able to make contact with her. Her brother Trevor was relieved to receive a call from her at 5:30 p.m. the next day, but he became concerned upon noticing that she seemed afraid and confused. She stated that she was in her car, but she had no idea where she was or how she got there. He relayed this information to Michael and Lori, and they contacted the police. But they were erroneously told that they could only file a missing person report after 12 hours had passed, and so this was done on the 26th of October, but by that time it was already too late. Ebby's car was found abandoned in Chalamont Park a few days later, with her belongings strewn around the vehicle. Searches were conducted, but nothing was found, and later investigations revealed glaring mistakes made by the Little Rock Police Department, which, according to many people, included fellow officers who had not taken Ebby's case seriously. No efforts were made to find surveillance footage of the areas where she was last seen. Important witnesses were never interviewed, and investigators showed a general disinterest in locating her. In 2017, the park where her car was found was searched again, this time more thoroughly, and this time Ebby's remains were found in a drainage ditch, a photo of which has since been made public. She was found just 60 feet from the spot where her car was parked. No one has been arrested in connection with the homicide investigation, which is ongoing, and the Little Rock Police Department have asked that anyone with helpful information contact them at 501-404-3128. Number 3. A photo that's been released by the police in Queensland, Australia, seems to show nothing more than an undercover carport and a house with a corrugated iron roof, but in reality, it shows the site where a homicide was committed in 2008. The case involves the caretaker of this property, 62-year-old Francis Patrick Foley, known to his friends and family as Frank. The house is located in Rubyvale in the Central Highlands of Australia and is situated in an area known for reward fossicking, which is the collecting of minerals and gems from soil. By the 23rd of December that year, Frank's neighbor had become concerned after not seeing him for several days, and he went over to the property to make sure that he was all right. He knocked on the door but got no answer, and so he searched the rest of the property. He'd been struck by flooding a few days earlier, so the neighbor became very concerned when he failed to locate Frank, but he could never have anticipated what he discovered next. Under the carport in the photo, he found a gas bottle that exploded, and traces of what he believed to be biological material next to Frank's wallet. He contacted the Queensland police, who immediately made their way to the house, and they were able to confirm that it was indeed biological material that was found. Furthermore, they realized that the gas bottle hadn't merely exploded, but it had been damaged with a large firearm. The same firearm that caused the damage to the house's front door, and it was soon speculated that Frank had been attacked. His neighbors were questioned, and they reported hearing a firearm being discharged just after the last time that Frank was seen. The area was searched, but no further clues were found, and it remained unknown whether an attack had taken place and what had become of Frank. Investigators were certain that he was no longer alive, but the details surrounding the case continued to leave them baffled. For the next 14 years, Frank's case remained cold, but in 2022, a gem fossicker who was searching for gems in Sheep Station Creek made a startling discovery. He contacted the police to report that he had found human remains, and when these were analyzed, they were confirmed to belong to Frank. The creek was thoroughly searched and excavated, but no further evidence was found. The case had at least seen some progress, and Frank's neighbors were questioned again, but they had nothing helpful to add. Frank's son, Sean, believes that someone in the close-knit community knows what happened that day, and he asked them to come forward so that justice can be served. It's been suggested that Frank's life was ended during a robbery, since it was known that he owned some very valuable gemstones. A few people of interest were identified, but with very little evidence to go on, Frank's case has gone cold again. A $500,000 reward is being offered to anyone who can help the police identify his attacker, and they're urged to call 131-444 to report what they know. Number 2. In 1983, 58-year-old Aberdeen taxi driver George Dodd Murdoch was murdered in an unsolved case. At 8:35 on September 29th, George picked up a passenger at New Marcliffe Hotel and headed towards the Cutler suburb. He was later found deceased next to his taxi on Pitfodell Station Road. Investigators determined the passenger, seated behind George, strangled him with a cheese wire. George fought back, but the attacker overpowered him, stole his wallet, and fled on foot, leaving the wire behind. A witness saw a slender man, 20 to 30 years old, enter the taxi, and another witness reported a man with injuries and stained clothing entering a takeout restaurant around 9:30 p.m. 2 boys saw the attack, but they were too scared to intervene. The suspect is described as clean-shaven, dark-haired, and 20 to 30 years old, about 5'7" with a slight build and an Aberdeen accent. Despite questioning over 10,000 residents and compiling 8,000 statements, the case went cold. A $20,000 reward has failed to generate any leads. A £20,000 reward has failed to generate any leads. In 2022, a photo of someone in an Iron Maiden shirt was released, and they might have crucial information. In 2023, the reward was increased to £50,000 after the attacker's DNA was extracted from George's clothing. Though the DNA isn't in the national database, authorities hope for a future match, and anyone with information is asked to contact the Aberdeen police. Number 1. Crime scene photos from the case involving 23-year-old Jodie LeCornu show her car in the spot where she was found after her life was ended, and investigators hope that the images may jog the memory of a witness who is yet to contact them. In March of 1993, Jodie was a student at Towson University in Maryland, and to make money, she was working a part-time job at a local bank. On the 1st of March that year, she'd finished work and decided that she wanted to go out with a few of her friends. But upon telling her boyfriend of her plans, she became angry, and the couple had a heated argument. Jodie decided to join her friends nevertheless, and they remained at Mount Washington Tavern until closing time. One of the tavern's employees asked her for a ride home to Roland Park, which was out of Jodie's way, but she agreed since she hadn't planned on immediately heading home. It's known that after dropping him off, she visited an ATM, after which she bought 6 beers at a store on Falls Road. She then drove to a parking lot close to her home where she was stopped, presumably to drink some of the beers, and it's here that she was seen by several witnesses talking to an unidentified man who had approached her car. They would later describe him as African American and stood about 5'10" inches tall and weighed between 200 and 220 pounds. He was dressed in a green coat and at the time was estimated to be in his early 20s. While witnesses saw no argument between Jodie and the man, he suddenly produced a firearm, aimed it at Jodie, and fired. She was struck in the back, and the man fled on foot. Jodie managed to start the car's engine, and she drove across York Road, where her car came to a standstill in a parking lot. The next morning, her family desperately tried to contact her, but in vain. Her parents were celebrating their wedding anniversary that day, but their lives were changed forever when they were told that Jodie had been found deceased in her car and that her attacker was still on the loose. Witnesses would later state that after Jodie's car stopped across the road, the man returned, reached in, and removed something from the vehicle before making his getaway in a white BMW, driving south onto Walker Avenue. No arrests have been made due to a lack of evidence, and Jodie's case remains unsolved, despite Jenny's insistence that the main suspect was indeed her sister's attacker. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knott, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.